We'll go ahead and start back. All right, guys, we're gonna start back. If y'all wanna come in or hang out, I don't care. So, variances. We talked about variances, we talked about zoning changes, questions on the difference between a variance and zoning change. Variance is an easy little small change, a zoning is a big change. Again, I've said it earlier, I'll say it again. Do not let your folks buy property with the assumption that they can get it rezoned. It is not an easy thing to do. Rezoning is very difficult, and you do have to go before the zoning board, and anybody who doesn't like you will show up. So that's variances versus zoning. This is an example of what the zoning signs can sometimes look like. I've seen them look different, but typically they have this kind of flavor to them. Really hard to get. People will show up for the public hearing. If you are buying with the intention of rezoning, probably shouldn't buy. Or know that the zoning is difficult and you may not get that. So it does have applications and fees. We had somebody who was going to apply for a zoning change. They were looking to change the zoning on a property to commercial. It was $1,000 application fee just to go before the zoning board, to have all these people show up at the zoning hearing and tell you no. Yeah, so you're going to drop at least $1,000, $1,500 just to start. Again, having these conversations with your buyers and sellers, this is important information because this is just not easy. If you want to use it for commercial, make sure it's zoned for commercial. And by the way, the commercial zoning, how many different zoning types did I show you already? Yeah, there's a lot of, there's like 50 shades of gray for all zoning. And it is for light zoning, industrial, business, high-rise, lots of different types of zoning for different types of activities. So make sure that whatever your client's need is acceptable to what it is zoned for. Actually, the property I was telling you about that I had the building on was weird. It was zoned for everything. It was a residential house, but when I called, because I wanted to know what the zoning was when I purchased it, because actually it could have been a duplex, and that's why I called, because I was like, wouldn't it be cool to turn this into a duplex? And I called and they're like, yeah, that's zoned for multifamily and agriculture and landfill and like everything you could. It was seriously a golf course. I'm like, so I'm putting a golf course on a 0.1 acre lot. No, probably not. So yeah, it was really interesting, but it did have all those accommodations. So it could have been a duplex, it could have been multifamily, it could have been a lot of different things. So yeah, always check with zoning. A couple other built-in zonings or other zoning types. We have special use exceptions. Special use exceptions are built into that master plan we were talking about. They pretty much say if we're going to build a fire department or if we're going to build a library, we do not need to get any zoning variations on this. It is built in that those things are for the public and those things will be allowed automatically. So essentially automatic zoning variances for those are zoning changes. Sometimes they're called a special use property, like a hospital, library, or museum for just a specialty use. It's not something that's readily available. It's not a common property. Or a conditional use permit is also granted in those capacities if it's not built in. Questions on that? All right, couple other terms are overlay districts. And this is where we actually start talking about the historic preservation and some of these other things. So when we have zoning, and the property I just mentioned that was mine, it's not always just one zoning. There might be, and for example, if you look at downtown Winston we have Old Salem, right? So we have these old homes. And so if you have these old homes, they're probably in a historic preservation district. They are also downtown Winston-Salem. They're also in Forsyth County. They are also in, actually some of them are in a business area. There's a school there, so there's the college that's down there. So there's a lot of things that could be overlaid. So an overlay is when you have multiple layers. And this is the way, by the way, GIS works, is with your GIS, Geographic Information Systems is what that stands for. It's the county maps that you can go online and look up your property. And so they have multiple layers. Sometimes one of them is elevation. They have a orthophotography or aerial photography layer. And so you can turn on what that looks like. And then there's other layers. It might be historic layers. It might be zoning layers. It's going to be school districts, lots of layers. And sometimes those overlap. We call those overlay districts where you might be in more than one at the same time. And then the historic properties we talked a little bit about. You just got to be uber cautious anytime you're purchasing, selling, or working with historic property. As brokers in the real estate world, if you're going to engage in those, make sure you get some help because there's lots of Preservation societies, lots of levels. The city has one. The National if you're on the National Historic Registry, you have a whole lot of things. They do not, those are properties are essentially antiques, and they will not let you mess them up without their permission. So sometimes if you're even replacing the windows, because you live in this house and it's cold, because those windows are 100 years old, you have to special order them from someone who makes a modern window that's insulated that looks like a 100-year-old window. So you have to make sure you get that. Yes, sir.
We did one over in Statesville, and the problem with it was that you could still get a double pane that looked like a historic window, but they actually required the functionality to be the same. And they had the ropes that went up and went down with like the blockway on the backside.
Yep.
So you weren't allowed to put a lock on the window, and it was like a 2,500 square foot house. So you can't lock any of the windows, and it's got a dumbwaiter that opens and closes the window for you.
Wow.
It was a cluster.
Yeah, that's why I said historic stuff. I actually had an investor friend who used to love buying these old houses, and not necessarily historic, but just old houses. And she said it must be a sickness, because no one on their right mind is going to buy an old house knowing you're going to run into these kind of problems and expect to make money off of it. Yeah. Because you want to help them, you want to save them, and you want to do things, and you just love these old houses. They're so cool, but they're like the movie. They're money pits. They just cost more because everything's so old.
We got like 2 months into it and bailed on it. I mean, it was, and we were still waiting on permits on half the stuff. I mean,
that's the other thing to keep in mind, yeah.
We repainted it and we did the floors, and that was all we could do without, without permits and everything, and we ended up bailing on it. Yeah. It was like, we're not gonna sit on this for 6 months and wait for permits, so.
Yeah, and that's the other thing, you mentioned the permit. Actually, the Association of Realtors, the North Carolina Association of Realtors, has purchased a historic property in downtown Raleigh because we do a lot of legislative stuff and we have a staff there. So they found that property is basically bought as an auction, foreclosure type property, but they've been working on it almost 2 years, and no one is in the building yet. Because Raleigh, of all places, who you think would be excited about commerce being downtown, has so much red tape. We can't get permits and contractors approved because you have to run the plans, you have to be, because we're using it for, it's an old house, so it'll be office, but we're gonna be renting the upper level and all these different things. So contractors have to get approved, materials have to get approved, and you can't do anything without a permit. And if they don't give you a permit, you're just sitting there. And so permitting can be a big, long process. Very much so with historic properties, because they won't let you do it until they're satisfied with the way you're doing it. Yeah. So you gotta be real cautious.
It's even into processes too. Like, okay, great, you have the material approved and you have the plan approved, but you have to approve the product. It's like showing you're working on that problem. It's stupid.
We're actually going to talk about that in a little bit because we get into environmental controls, but a lot of these old houses have asbestos and lead-based paint, and how you go about that, and who can do that, and what does that look like, and how does that affect your neighbors, and it really can become a cluster. Zoning concepts continue. Aesthetic. What's aesthetic zoning? What does aesthetic mean?
Just for looks.
Is it pretty? Yeah, gotta make it
Can't put
pretty.
anything in downtown Cartersville unless it's brick front.
Yep, that's
For
right. Actually,
example.
I think of Summerfield Oak Ridge. If you've ever been in that area, everything there is all brick. There's no signs in the area. They have height restrictions. Everything's ground level signs. So I think it's the only brick Wendy's and what McDonald's I remember seeing for a while. But they were one of the first ones to have this aesthetic. Everything there is brick.
The mayor killed Cracker Barrel because they don't have brick front.
Yeah.
So now they're going to be outside the city limits. They're still coming, just outside the city limits.
Isn't that something though? It's like, oh, we want everything to be brick, so we're just not going to allow Cracker Barrel. Who doesn't love Cracker Barrel? They have a front porch. That's their like thing. That is like, don't bring your. That is what they sell, is their front porch. They sell you on that. Don't bring it. Don't bring it. Yeah. So sometimes it's counterintuitive, right? Sometimes it doesn't make sense. The intentions are all like well focused, right? They want to protect the integrity of the area, make everything look the same, not have any eyesores. They have good intentions, but as with all things,
Cracker Barrel draws and makes a ton of money.
Oh yeah,
Michelle,
every time.
a lot of these places do go along with how they want it done.
They would.
I've seen lots of places.
They would.
McDonald's has.
They said that for 3/4 of a mile down the road, we're going to keep our store the way we like it.
Yeah, and actually when we
It's
talk
our market,
about,
it's our brand.
And you're exactly right. And when you get into commercial real estate and you're dealing with these clients, they have to make those decisions. Is it better to purchase this property here where we have to, basically amend our brand and our building,
Yeah.
or is it more worthwhile to spend maybe even less money on a lot that's a little further away and keep our brand?
Yeah.
And that's a decision they have to weigh out.
Well, also, sometimes the lots are limited, like if you get in Cape Cod, it's like you're lucky to even get anything.
Unless you're Dollar General, and then you can go anywhere.
Everything you just need to be able to see them from the highway. That's one of their sticking points.
Dollar
And
General?
No, Cracker
Cracker
Barrel.
Barrel,
And you
yeah.
still will be able to.
Yeah, that's like Walgreens. There's a reason Walgreens on every corner. They pay a premium for the corner lot. That is a part of their business model. They do not want a lot that's not visible. And that's why they always buy, you'll always see them on a corner lot. Spot zoning, by the way, and aesthetic zoning is exactly what we just talked about, is how it looks, and zoning on how it looks. Spot zoning is not favored. This is, the reason it's not favored is largely in conjunction with kind of the conversation we've had. We have a board of elected officials, and all of a sudden they allow one of their buddies to have a spot zoning that will allow them to do something on their lot that nobody else can do. Maybe some favoritism, maybe some discrimination. Really have to be able to justify how that worked. So spot zoning is not really favored. Typically you're just going to do either a variance or go after a zoning change. Spot zoning is very difficult to get.
But zoning change would affect all of the properties within that area, not just one property, right? Or can you ask for it for a specific?
Could be
Or is,
either.
or is this when they approve a change for a specific lot? Is that what
Yeah,
that
so
is?
this could be that, hey, we've got 4 blocks here and we want to tear down these houses that are zoned residential and build a building. That could be spot zoning, a commercial building, that could be spot zoning. It could be one parcel and I want to turn my house into a bed and breakfast and operate it as a business. Maybe, and there are examples where that might happen, and downtown would be where you've got one of these historic houses that's zoned residential. They may allow for a spot zone that says, you know what, you're zoned residential, but for that, in order to preserve that house, and because it's expensive to operate, we may offer some spot zoning for bed and breakfast. But it would be really hard. You really got to be justified in allowing that decision, because if you sit on that board and you allow somebody to get something that no one else can get, you're likely discriminating in some way, shape, or form.
You've set precedent too. I
Yeah.
still don't get the difference between that and just asking for the zoning change to begin with. What's the difference? Just
Yeah.
this is faster and
Usually this is given versus a zoning request, which is asked for.
okay.
Meaning that you have to go before the board. This does not go usually public hearing.
I got you.
But can't like the neighboring people vote if it's if it can happen or not? Like if you're in a neighborhood and you want to turn residential houses to commercial.
Sometimes, like I said, sometimes these spot zones happen without public input, which is also why they're frowned upon. It's just not safe for anybody. Urban and regional planning. So this is where we started getting a little more wiser to how things are developing and how we're sprawling, and they started looking at it more from just one town, more than just one city, but let's look regionally. Like we have a regional airport, regional waste facilities, regional water treatment plants. So let's share resources, let's plan appropriately so that as we grow, things work for everybody. I think a good example of this is some of the road projects, the beltways that are being there's a reason that that Greensboro, what is it called now? Piedmont Tri International, thank you. PTI. PTI is in the middle of Greensboro, High Point, Winston, Kernersville. It's centrally located as a regional airport. So sometimes those planning things help for everyone and they're looking at a bigger picture. So it takes into wide areas versus just one. Subdivision. So how many times do we have to split a piece of land to have a subdivision?
Once.
Just once. If we take one parcel and make it into 2, we now have a subdivision. Don't always get confused with thinking I'm going to have a plat and make it this huge 100 lot neighborhood. One piece of land into 2 is a subdivision. Yeah.
So subdivision is always just a neighborhood?
Not necessarily.
Oh.
No, it could be I have 10 acres and I want to give you 5 acres. I surveyed it off. I have now subdivided it into 2 parcels, made one parcel into 2.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I guess I always got confused because I always thought, okay, like you live in a subdivision, so.
And that's where it gets denoted that
Yeah.
subdivision has come synonymous with neighborhood, but it's
Yeah.
really not. If you take
Okay.
one piece of land and make it into 2, it's been subdivided. It's a subdivision.
Like a long subdivision.
Like the long subdivision, yeah, like out in Davie County, up Davie Academy Road. We took I want to say it was 3 acres, and we gave them, my sister, an acre. But
Oh,
it's
okay.
recorded as a long subdivision, section 123, something like that. I don't even know the name of it. I wish they would let me name it. I would have thought of something better. Of course, I was like 12, so it probably would have been a good name. So what regulations exist and what should when I should decide to build a subdivision? And this is the other thing you may run into, more so now probably than in the last 10 years for sure. Right now building is booming, would you agree? Yeah, there's a lot of new neighborhoods popping up. builders are looking for places to build. There's just not enough land, there's not enough places for them to divide, so they're trying to find places that they can subdivide into a neighborhood.
Where are all these people coming from is what I wanna know, cause I know like
That's a
all
different
this-
class.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I've just been so curious, and my husband wanted me to ask you too, it's like downtown, all these,
It's not so much that they really came from anywhere. What happened was, for the recession, builders didn't build houses for 10 years. We didn't stop making people for 10 years. So we still had a need, we just had a gap in supply. So now
Delay.
that we're back, we've got this high demand because people can get financing now, people can buy again, and so it's not really that we're still 235,000 people. It's not that many more people. It's just that the demand is there because there was more people in one household previously. Now the same number of people, they just need more households.
but
Kids
there's
grew
not,
up.
if there's
Kids
that
grew up.
same number of people,
Yeah.
I,
I mean, we had people getting cohabitating that were separated or even divorced. A lot of people couldn't afford to get divorced, so they
First
stayed
floor, second
separated.
floor.
So they would stay in the same house. One, because they couldn't afford it, the economy was bad, but two, you couldn't get financing. The whole mortgage market shut down. You had to have $100,000 in the bank to get a loan for 50, and a good job and credit to do it. So I mean, it was just really extreme. So for a period of time, lending slowed down, and now that the supply is back, we have more options for people to choose from, and lending is better, then yeah, we're seeing a huge demand for that, and we'll continue to see for probably some time. The question is whether they overbuild and we get too many houses, and then we get a little bit of a surplus. But right now it's supply and demand, and we just have more demand than we have supply. And that's why it makes it a seller's market, like we talked about, understand that market, and we're definitely in a seller's market here. So as we make these subdivisions to increase the supply for the demand, there's a lot of rules with that. And that goes back to the regional planning of where do we want the residences to be? Where do we have zoning that accommodates development for residential properties? Right now, and as in most cases, it's typically in the suburbs around the cities, right? Because we don't want a lot more development downtown from new houses. We're seeing a lot of renovation and taking old buildings and building them back. But building new subdivisions, we're going to need land, or to do that, we're going to sprawl out a little bit. So we need to know what kind of regulations exist to build those subdivisions. Make it look like that. Isn't that beautiful? Let's take that, yay, and turn it into that. That's beautiful. That's money. So I worked with a lot of farmers growing up, and they always had a saying, because I was always sad because they kept selling their farmland. Like, man, y'all were selling your farmland, and they would develop it and turn it into this. And they would tell me, they say, yeah, Stephen, there's nothing I can grow per capita, per acre, like I can houses. I'm like, yeah, you're right. You can't make as much off of corn as you can off a house. They would sell corn their whole life to make what they can make off of one lot, or being able to develop it. So, as we determine that this property can be developed, and we are ready to start marketing and selling, when can we list it for sale? Can we be like, hey, we gotta come and just buy it now? So some of the rules that revolve around this largely protect the consumer, right? We're not gonna let you buy something until we know it's there. So as a developer identifies a property they want to build on, they're going to go through the permits, they're going to go through the rigmarole, they're going to get the plans, the plat, the survey, the permeable space versus the impermeable space, curbs, gutters, street specifications. It's a lot of money to develop a property. And in fact, we talk about builders, but usually there's two parts. There's usually a developer who takes the land and makes it this, who then sells it to builders, who then build the houses, who then sell it to you. So it's usually sometimes the builder and developer are the same, but you have to have some pretty deep pockets, because making these streets can be easily a 7-figure expense. You're looking north of $1 million to put in roads, curbs, street, gutters, the retention ponds, all the things that. So a builder usually doesn't have enough funds to develop and then build a $300,000-$400,000 house on top of that, or multiple $300,000 and $400,000 houses. So developers a lot of times will come in and look at this and say, how many lots can we get in? And a lot of times their assessment as a developer as to how many lots we can get here, what kind of amenities do we have, sewer, do we have water, is it gonna be well, is it gonna be septic, communications, those type of things then affect, one, how many lots they can get, and two, the amount of money they can get per lot. And as we did the math in the last class, that's how a developer can look at it and say, do I want to develop this, and will I get a return based on the number of lots that I can get out of it? So these lots then, are not available for purchase until we have cleared the red tape. We have to go through planning and zoning. We have to get approval, make sure that we are zoned appropriately, make sure we have told them and shown them what we call the plat map here, the proposed plat map. This is what we want to do with it. When they give us the green light, then we have what we call a preliminary plat. Preliminary says, if you build it the way you showed me, then yes, you're good to go. And then they will let you start that process once they give you the green light. We still cannot list it for sale yet, though. Yes, sir.
So if a developer comes in and buys a piece of property like that, and they put in roads and things like that, are those not public roads, or are those considered
Ooh.
private?
Yeah, great question. He's asking about the roads in the subdivision. Hold that thought. Hold that thought. We're coming to that. So when we have this preliminary approval, we know what we're gonna get. We cannot yet sell something that doesn't exist. So now they're going to let you go build it, develop it, plat it, build the streets, build the gutters, section off the lots. Then once we get the final plat approval, meaning they will then come out and look to make sure you delivered what you said you were going to deliver, and now you have final approval saying yes, you did exactly the way we wanted it to do, it looks like your preliminary plan, then you can list and sell those lots, but not until you have final approval on the plat map. And I have this exact scenario running in my life right now. I found a piece of land, took it to a developer builder. It's only a small neighborhood, it's about 6 acres, 18 lots. They took it to the county, the city said, great, no problem. Preliminary approval. Have had preliminary approval for 18 months. So my builder in the interim, when they closed, started developing, they cleared the lots, started doing all the grading, putting in the lots and the pads and the street. And so we're still waiting for them to finish putting in the street. Once they finish putting in the street, all the pads and the lots are kind of cut up and ready to go. Then, when the city comes out and gives them final approval, I can come sell the lots and the houses, and that's great. And I'm just waiting, and it's supposed to be any day now, because I really want to sell them. But in the interim, all I can do right now is take your name and number and call you when I have a property that I can sell, because I don't have final approval. And part of that is to protect the consumer, so that I'm not selling you something on paper. I have final approval to sell you what is the final result, because as you develop, sometimes you run into things. Like, we got to move the street that way. There was a big boulder in the ground here. We couldn't quite get that up. It went too deep, so we just shifted everything a little bit this way. So things tend to change a little bit. So because of that, the buyer then is going to get these 15 days to back out of the contract if there is a material change in that lot. So if they went under contract, and this is, we got final plat approval and now they're ready to go, and they buy the lot and the final survey shows substantial change, they actually get a period that says, wait a minute, that's not what I was buying 0.125 of an acre, now I'm buying 0.17 of an acre, or a little bit less. So that final version, if it is changed substantially, they would have some opportunity to back out.
Is that different than due diligence? Really?
It is a little different than due diligence, mostly because with due diligence, we're investigating a property that's already in existence.
Okay.
In this capacity, we're just making sure that we're going to get what we were promised. Yeah, and there's usually a due diligence that follows after that, and we'll definitely get into that. Yes, ma'am.
So there's actually no stick-built building on this land yet, right?
That is correct. Just a lot, yeah. And so the development process happens a couple different ways. Sometimes it is a developer buying lots, and then their buyer may be you wanting to build your home, and you have a builder already lined up. So you will bring your own builder. You have your own builder to come build on that lot. Or they may be selling it to a builder directly. That builder will buy the lot, build the house, and then sell you the final product. So it can happen a couple different ways. So no obligation by the city or county to grant that final approval, by the way. If they gave you preliminary approval and you built it out, there is no guarantee that something could have changed. Typically they will, but if you for some reason didn't follow the rules or did something they didn't like, or if you're just being rude, they may decide to hold off or not give you that approval for a little bit. So you always gotta be very careful.
I missed a point somewhere. If you said they can't list the lots until you have the final approval, what would have changed from the time you got final approval till they actually bought the lot? Because you would have already figured that out by then, right? Or they missed something?
So once they get that final approval, they get the time to verify as a buyer that what they are buying is what they were promised.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sorry, I should have specified.
So it's really more of an inspection period.
It kinda is, that's why he says that due
Yeah,
diligence
no,
is
I
similar.
know. I know it's
very
different,
similar.
but okay.
So
Yeah,
you
very
don't
similar.
see the house that you're buying, but you're already agreeing to buy it?
Not
In
the
this case,
house,
we're just
just
talking
the
about
lot.
land. We're just talking about land.
Yeah, just the lot.
Assume you're thinking of a typical, I'm gonna buy a new construction house. Think of it as you're gonna custom build a house. You're gonna pick a floor plan from a book and you're just looking for a place to build it. So you're just buying the land.
Oh,
See,
okay.
they drew the
Unapproved
plat,
lot.
they drew the plat early on, and it could be that some other things transpired to make them change the road or something.
Oh, okay. So can you, so you're still, but you can sell it? You're still, okay.
So can I sell lots in an unapproved subdivision? Say no, you cannot. You cannot sell in an unapproved subdivision. And that's the take-home point here, guys, as your brokers and as I was just telling you, I can't list and sell those properties until the county has approved that this is a done deal. Once I have final approval from the county, then we can list and sell, but not until then.
So what kind of kickback do you get from your builder? I mean, I'm assuming you work with a builder.
I don't get kicked. First of all, we'll talk about that. Kickbacks are also a little bit illegal, depending on the structure. But for me, I found the land. They purchased the land. I got to represent them as their buyer's agent in the purchase of the land, so I got a commission off of that. And because I found them the land to develop, they are also going to in turn let me be the listing agent for all their properties.
But
So-
you can't recommend a builder and get a kickback from that.
So no, we'll actually talk about RESPA. So
RESPA.
any type of, and let me reference. You're using the word kickback. In our world, kickback is a bad word. It's a bad word.
It's a nasty
It's a nasty word. So there are ways to get compensated for doing things. It just has to be part of your agency agreement that says, hey, I am going to represent the builder in the sale of this lot, and they're going to pay me a commission, whatever that be, percentage, flat rate, to then market it. And so then you're actually acting as their seller's agent and getting commission, or if you're acting as a buyer's agent bringing them, then builders have a lot of different incentives for agents to bring buyers.
Then
So-
they don't have to pay their own.
yeah, so there's a lot of ways to legally structure it. I'm just used to kickbacks are illegal.
I gotcha.
Because they have to be, all of our compensation in the real estate world has to be disclosed. So if you get, $100 every time you send somebody for whatever, it has to be a documented disclosure and compensation agreement.
I got you. Okay.
So a lot of kickbacks is just like, so you call me out there. So there are ways to get compensated, and that's ultimately what you're looking at, is how to get paid, right? Yeah, and so builders will pay in different ways, and sometimes it might be and everything's negotiable. Commission's 100% negotiable, guys. We can negotiate whatever you want. I've paid myself a 10% commission before on a property that I owned. Because it was beneficial, right? Because I can charge myself as seller whatever commission I want to charge myself. The commission was actually a tax deduction, so it kind of helped me in the end of things. So there's ways to do it, but our commissions are whatever we want. I know what you're about to ask. There is no standard commission.
I was actually curious what the limit was.
Everybody
is there
talks
a
about
limit
6
on
and 3.
percentage?
There is no limit. Commission can be whatever you negotiate. Some people it's less, some people it's more. It depends on your level of service. And a lot of times the market,
So
when it's a
theoretically-
hotter market, you may not be able to get as much.
Theoretical question, I buy a flip house for $20,000, we sell it for 70, can I put 100% of that as commission if I sold it to myself, use that as a tax write-off and put it back in the market?
Within reason, I'm not going to give you tax advice because that's not what I do.
No, I was just
But
curious.
you could certainly consult with your tax professional. I think anybody that would look at that would say maybe trying to take a gross exaggeration on it. But legally, I mean, can you? Sure. Would it potentially be audited and questioned? Maybe. Maybe.
I'm curious because we operate under an LLC for the primary business, but we all put something in as far as, individuals, so, it's.
And that happens. And
Yeah.
sometimes you'll be in a situation where, I'm a realtor, you're a builder, and we have a mortgage folks or whatever, and we all go in and we just want to form an entity to buy property, right?
Mhm.
And my contribution is I can find and sell the property and save commission, right? And so that increases profit. Well, then my profit comes from the entity, so to speak.
Yeah,
The struggle with that is it all still has to be disclosed and open as to what you're doing and how you're doing it.
I got you, Okay.
But there's ways to do it, a lot of different ways to structure it.
I get where you're going.
Yeah, because some people bring some people bring a skill to the table. There's opportunity to, because a lot of, again, I told you, investing in real estate is kind of your wealth building opportunities. What if you're selling an apartment building and the commission is $20,000? You're selling a very expensive apartment building. What if instead of taking that commission, you negotiated with your client, your seller client or your buyer client, and said, great, I want to use that, instead of taking a commission in my pocket, credit it to you and you give me 5% ownership.
Yeah.
You can do it as long as it's disclosed. There's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah.
As long as everything's agreeable and legal and disclosed, there's ways to invest.
So as a PD, was your bid like set your commission rate that you charge, or do you?
That's a great question. So you asked about, and we'll actually get into a lot of commission conversations at agency and things, but does your BIC set your commission rate? Typically firms have a policy on what that firm will charge. So as provisional brokers having to work under a broker in charge at a firm, that firm is likely going to tell you what your leniencies are within your commission range. As an individual broker, standalone, Stephen Long, sole proprietor, me, myself, and I can charge whatever I want. This little or
But you're gonna wanna be aware of what your competition's charging, so you don't price yourself out of the market, even as good as you are.
Yeah, and we actually get into that. He's talking about his competition, what they're charging. There's actually a thing called the Sherman Antitrust Act that we'll talk about, and that's what we call price fixing. So I can't really get into, and as we get into conversations, or if you're in an area where my competition's like, hey, I'm charging 10%, you should charge 10%, we all get 10%, now we're all going to federal prison. So let's not get in those conversations. But ultimately, there is a supply and demand, like the houses. If there is a demand for realtors and they need more of us, we can probably charge more. If we're a dime a dozen and anybody and the brother can do the job the same, maybe going to get less for it. Yeah. Public versus private. And this goes to your question earlier with the subdivision. If I am building a new neighborhood and this new neighborhood has streets to access it in which the developer is installing them, there is a mandatory street disclosure statement with all new developments. It says, as a new developer, when you are selling your lots for the first time to these folks, they need to know, is this a private road or is this a state maintained road? You as brokers are responsible for discovering this and disclosing this to your clients, whether you be on the buy side or the list side. They need to know, do they, as a private access, using the private road as access, do they need to contribute to the maintenance of this road, or will the state come and do it? And you do not want to be the real estate broker that gets the phone call in December with our one snow of the year that says,
It's your
who's
turn.
plowing my road? Nobody's plowing my road. Because the DOT doesn't have to. Because that's your subdivision street. It's not state maintained. Sometimes those HOA dues you're paying in are taking care of those roads. If you're in a townhouse community where you have more of a parking lot type of thing, a lot of times that is included in your HOA, which is another reason you want to investigate when you're buying there. If the parking lot looks a little holy, there might be an assessment coming to pave it. It's another thing to keep a red flag on. Yeah.
So there's no enforcement on speed limits, really? I mean, other than
From a
association.
I mean, ultimately, in a private road, whatever the private road owners can kind of dictate what they want. Public roads are subject to DOT, including law enforcement.
Well, and that's why I was curious earlier, just as far as like reinforcement of speed limit, because I guess if there's an officer, even if it's a posted speed limit, it's still a private road, there's really nothing you can do about it, other than give you a hard time.
A lot of times, actually, my wife was law enforcement, and I love to know the rules. And so when she was in BLET, I asked the same questions, but this is not me giving legal advice, but from what I understand, they call them PVAs, public vehicular areas, which essentially are, if you are a hazard to the safety of anybody, they can cite you. But if speeding in a private road that you're not even supposed to be on, or that you may or you actually own potentially, they may not be able to do anything. A lot of times they won't. And actually, I got pulled over one time it was a stop sign in those type of areas, and it was more of a warn you because he couldn't do anything. But he just wanted. He had the right to. I was in a hurry.
The other thing is, on a public street, you can't assume it's going to be maintained by the state, because they're not obligated to maintain them all. They usually require a certain amount of people there and population or whatever. So is that part of our responsibility to confirm that too?
100%. So in conjunction with whether it's private or public, what happens too, by the way, is when they build these new subdivisions, they will typically build these private streets to DOT standards. Same width, same height, same quality. Everything that the DOT, if they were building it, they will build it to that standard. They will then offer it to the Department of Transportation, saying, hey, we built a new road, why don't y'all take it over? And if the DOT says, sure, we have the funds and we will, then it can go to public. But until then, it remains private. And as a private road, your neighborhood subdivision restrictions or HOA rules will dictate, how do we pay for this? How do we maintain this road? If there's potholes, who pays for that? And that's why if you're driving through some of these neighborhoods, you'll see a non-state representative out there putting asphalt in potholes. Because it's a neighborhood's responsibility to do it. The state's not going to touch it.
So can you pull this in the surveys as well? Because I'm sure every client you get, they're not going
Ooh.
to ask about all these little details, correct? So like, do we need to inform them of all this, or only if they ask us?
So 2 parts. First of all, brand new subdivision, you can't legally can't purchase a lot without knowing, because it is required of that developer to issue a public or private roads maintenance agreement, or basically a statement of whether the road is public or private. So you will sign a disclosure as a buyer telling you that it's public or private. Ultimately though, no matter what road, where it is, broker friends, it's on us to, unfortunately, the best way is call the Department of Transportation and say, hey, I'm looking at 123 Main Street. Can you tell me if the street in front of that is state maintained? And that is how you find out.
Okay.
That's the only way. By the way, the street sign has nothing to do with it. Brown sign, green sign, blue sign, does not matter. You will call the Department of Transportation and say, is this a state maintained road, yes or no? And if it's not a state road, you as broker or potentially homeowner are going to have to provide a document to any lender as to who is maintaining the access road to this property. Because they are giving you a loan for a 6-figure property, potentially, to say, how are you going to get to it? If that's private, someone could take away your access and make you a landlocked property, compromising our asset. So who's maintaining that? If a flood comes and washes the road completely away, is that property still worth the same? We can't even get to it. So we as the lender need to know who is legally responsible for taking care of that road, and we call it a private road maintenance agreement. And as brokers, you may have to help your folks. I've been door knocking before, because we have these little gravel roads here in Forsyth County and all around, and especially in the rural areas where Bubba and their friends built 4 houses on this road, and it's their road, and they just bring gravel out and scrape it whenever they need to. Great. Can I get that reduced to writing, because I can't get a loan on this property without it? We had a property up for sale in a 3-mile long gravel road.
Wow.
There was
Wow.
three houses on it. 3 houses on this road.
Mile for each.
So we wanted to drive, ours was towards the end, and we said, hey, we need a private road maintenance agreement. Who's in charge of taking care of this road? And they said, well, we just put gravel on it whenever. I said, great. So can we put that in writing? They said, no. Because none of the homeowners would commit in writing to say, yes, we will maintain a 3-mile long gravel road.
They don't want the lender calling them later saying, why didn't you do it?
Yeah, exactly right. They don't want the liability of signing that document. So because we had this property for sale and we did not have a private road maintenance agreement, it is now a rental property. Because we could not, aside from a cash buyer, because a cash buyer could buy it, but as anybody getting a financing or getting a loan on it would not be able to purchase it without seeing that private road maintenance agreement. So these are the types of things you need to be prepared for, both on the buy side and the list side. Who owns the road? Who owns or controls access to this property? And if it's a new subdivision, and that's why that new subdivision street disclosure exists, is to inform consumers, your road is your road. And if it is a private road in a subdivision, someone who's managing your HOA, maybe you, need to make sure you're collecting enough money that when the road falls apart, y'all have money to put it back. And that's a big part of, by the way, what's your qualification to be a member of the HOA? You own a piece of dirt. Does that mean you're qualified to collect enough reserves that when we have to repave 3 miles of roads, we have enough money to do it without doing an assessment of maybe thousands of dollars per house? If you're buying in that neighborhood, wouldn't you want to know? If the roads don't look good, maybe you need to sequester the finances of the HOA to make sure they have some money. Because if they don't, guess where they're coming?
To you.
Yeah, they're going to be sending you an assessment to pay for those roads.
So if a developer sells the entire division to a builder, which I know that it probably doesn't happen very often, but it can.
Yep.
Then it's the builder's responsibility for that disclosure to the buyer?
Mhm.
Or,
It'll
because
be
the
a part of the
developer doesn't
contract.
have to disclose it to
Ultimately, let me back up. It is the brokers. If you are an agent in the transaction, buyer or seller side, it is your responsibility because anything on public record is considered something you can discover. If you can pick up a phone call and get that answer, you should pick up the phone and get that
And it
answer.
just goes in the contract or as a form or something, it's a disclosure?
It's usually a form.
That we have access
From
to?
our aspect, brokerage aspect, to disclose something, it just has to be in writing.
Gotcha.
So as long as I disclose to them in writing and I've told them and they are aware and they make whatever decision they make knowing that information, I'm okay. From the legal perspective of in a new neighborhood, a new developer is gonna have to do a road disclosure statement.
So when you're doing this and it's verbal, do you write down the date and time and who you talk to?
Oh, and I'm gonna put it in writing, absolutely. Yeah, anything that you get from a disclosure standpoint, septic information, road information, have it in writing, have them email it to you. If you can't,
Okay.
you write it down, say who you talked to, write down the date, what they told you, absolutely.
So the zoning, all this, sometimes they send it to you, fax
I
it to
will
you.
always ask, say, can you fax it, email it, send it to me so I have something from them in writing? If for some reason I cannot, I would make a note of it and write it down. Who did I talk to? When did I talk to them? What number did I reach them at? As many details as I can
Yeah.
transcribe.
Might
Send
be
an email.
exactly where it's headed based on the caption there. But when is it decided whether it's gonna be private or public? Is that generally known as they're developing the preliminary master plan?
So typically, they're going to be assumed to be private until DOT accepts it. And that's the purpose of this slide. No road becomes public until the DOT has usually seen it, is comfortable with the condition that it's in, has the money to then take it. And then it will become public, and until then, it will remain private. So all new roads will remain private until the DOT
But
accepts it.
typically, you would have had those discussions early on as you were developing your preliminary
Yeah.
plan, that A, we're gonna build it to DOT standards, B, DOT has said preliminarily, yeah, we'll take it, you know, assuming that you do build it, we're copacetic.
Yeah, getting the DOT to commit to anything is pretty, but ultimately, you would love to have these conversations and give them a heads up on what's coming. And a lot of it does have to do with their funding, if they have the ability to even accept it.
And they're not really buying it, they're just agreeing to maintenance it, right? It's
That's
a
right.
budget thing.
That's all they're doing, and it's a budget thing. And the reason you're seeing so much road construction in our new state bird here is because the DOT finally has money for these projects. When our budget for the state was not great, you know, those really high gas taxes that we love to pay, we're going to cover the deficit in the budget. Well, now that things are going again, the state has enough money to fund their budget, so the money they were collecting for roads is actually going into roads now. We passed some legislation that they have to use it for that, so they have money, and that's the reason you're seeing some of the Business 40 and the bypasses, and that bypass has been in work since 1969.
Yeah.
I mean,
Probably
it's
even
been-
longer than that.
yeah, it's been going for a long time. So they're finally now funding it, and that's ultimately what you're looking for. Should they have the money to fund it and take it? And if they do, then it's good, and if they don't, they won't. No matter how well you build it, they just won't. So that is how they become public, and we talked about the private road maintenance agreement with the gravel road, and we will talk about interstate land sales when you get back from your break.